Where have the NGOs gone 5 years after that devastating Indian earthquake?
All that coming up in One Planet with me, Toby Murcott.
And me, Charu Shahane.
The immigration policies of European Union countries are becoming increasingly restrictive, driving refugees into the hands of ruthless traffickers. That's according to the British charity and pressure group, the Refugee Council. Describing immigration measures in the EU as draconian, the report states that over half the asylum seekers and refugees who come to Britain are forced to use illegal means to enter the UK.
Well, with us in the studio is Matthew Grenier of the Refugee Council. Matthew, paint a picture for us. If I wanted to claim asylum in a European country, what would I have to do?
Firstly, people who are going to be fleeing as refugees are going to be traumatized. They might have been raped, they might have been tortured, they might have seen a member of their family killed in front of their eyes. So they're going to be desperate people. They're going to be looking for any means that they can to actually escape from a country. We don't actually help people to escape from countries. The only way that people can escape from countries is by using illegal documentation. And this is really what the focus of the report is about. It's how, because people can't escape legally, they're forced into the hands of traffickers.
But it's not people like that who the European Union is talking about. They're really talking about bogus asylum seekers, aren't they?
Well, they are talking about bogus asylum seekers, but the problem is by putting the preventative measures at the front end of the system, that is, stopping people fleeing from their countries, they cannot distinguish between people who are genuine and people who are not genuine. The real method of actually distinguishing between people as to whether they are actually refugees or whether they've come here for economic reasons should happen in the European Union, in the different countries of the European Union. So we should have systems in place whereby someone comes here, says, I'm claiming refugee status, and then that claim for refugee status can then be processed very quickly so that the person, if they are a genuine refugee, can then get on and live their lives.
Well, stay with us in the studio. We have a clip of the British Minister with responsibility for immigration, Mike O'Brien. Here's what he said recently.
We will deal firmly with economic migrants who are seeking to abuse the system. Many of them are arriving without documents, so we're investing in a whole series of new airline liaison officers abroad to help reduce the number of undocumented passengers arriving at our ports. We're increasing our work with the police and National Criminal Intelligence Service and other agencies to target major organisers of abuse of the asylum system.
Well, that was Mike O'Brien, who's clearly making a distinction between bogus asylum seekers, in fact, people he thinks are economic migrants, people who've come here because they want a better life, as it were, and genuine asylum seekers, those who've been persecuted in their own countries. Is that a valid distinction, in your opinion?
Well, of course, there always will be people who want to move from country to country for economic reasons. You only have to look at countries like the United States of America or Hong Kong to see what impact that can have on a country. Those two countries were actually founded on the hard work of immigrants, so it shouldn't be a surprise that people move for economic reasons at all. But as I was saying before, what really needs to happen is that the actual system for deciding who is or who is not a refugee needs to have more resources put into it to ensure that people can actually, that their bona fides can be decided upon quickly and fairly.
It's one thing to say we need more resources put into that, but is it actually easy to make that distinction between legitimate asylum seekers and economic migrants?
It can be easy in some circumstances. Let me give you an example. Quite recently, you may be aware that there have been a lot of Kosovans fleeing from the situation in Kosovo. We at the Refugee Council have been seeing a lot of those individuals have arrived on our doorstep, and we've been giving them advice, putting them in contact with housing organisations, telling them about their rights, essentially. Now, we're also aware that there are certain people coming from Albania who are claiming to be Kosovan. The people who come from Kosovo are ethnic Albanians, but actually they speak a slightly different language from Albanians, and that's a very easy distinction you can make. And you can say, well, you know, clearly you're not from where you say you are. We don't believe you, we'll refuse your claim for asylum.
So that's one clear distinction. Someone who's coming from an area that isn't a war-torn area or doesn't have a genuine right to claim for asylum. But are economic migrants always a bad thing?
Well, I mean, I don't think they are. I mean, it's not only economic migrants that are a bad thing. I mean, you only have to look at refugees and the contributions they made to this country. You must be aware of Marks and Spencer's was founded by a refugee. ICI was founded by the son of a refugee. We've had Nobel Prize winners. We've had Alfred Einstein. You know, the number of refugees who've made substantial contributions, not only to the UK economy, but also to the world economy as a whole and to the world society is substantial.
Do you think the government should make a distinction between economic migrants and political refugees, or do you think the law should be changed completely to introduce a category of economic migrants who ought to be permitted to stay in countries?
Well, we used to, of course, in this country have that distinction. Immigrants were called immigrants, refugees were called refugees. It's only over the last 10 years that those two words have been brought together through a variety of different legislative acts where you've had an asylum and immigration bill going through Parliament. And probably it's true to say in the general public's mind now, the two are inextricably drawn together. You can't sort of, you're either a refugee or you're an economic migrant. And there's not really any coherent policy about immigration of economic migrants coming into this country. I would say in response to your question, though, that refugees are a very distinct group of people. And we are signatories to and we abide by the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees. We have a very long and proud tradition of offering refugees sanctuary in this country, and I think we should maintain that tradition.
So you don't think fleeing poverty is a valid reason to be fleeing a country?
Well, it is a valid reason to be leaving a country, certainly, and it's something which, I know my brother fled in theory this country to go and work in Hong Kong, and you could say he is an economic migrant. But in terms of the strict definitions of the UN Convention, for what it's been drawn up for, I think it is totally applicable, as long as it is applied appropriately.
Well, one country which is just about to make the distinction between economic migrants and political asylum seekers is South Africa. The country's Aliens Act, dating back to the last government, does not distinguish between these two categories of refugees. Now the country is planning to introduce a law to make the distinction. That will make it harder for refugees to come to South Africa, which they have been in droves since apartheid ended and the new government took over. South Africa has become a sort of mecca for migrants from other parts of the African continent. Many see it as a country which allows them more freedom than their own, and for many others it's become a place to earn a halfway decent living. But as David Edmonds reports from Cape Town, some local South Africans want them out.